Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to another Adobe XD Masterclass. My name is Howard Pinsky, Senior XD Evangelist here at Adobe, and I hope you're all doing well on this Friday afternoon. As you may have just noticed, I'm tinkering with some transitions that I created in Adobe XD. Probably not working very well, but thanks for your patience. If you are tuning in live here on Behance, let me know in the chat who you are and where you're tuning in from if you're on Twitter. Hello, Twitterverse. I can't see chat over there, so if you do want to chat along, head on over to behance.net/Adobe Live. Big hello to Cody and Tatiana and Megan and Brett and Umacorn. And there's me in there, Messiahu. If I mispronounced your name, I do apologize. Sylvia, great to see all of you. Katya from Austria, great to see you. All right, so let's go ahead and hop over to my screen. Masterclass number 52. We've been at this for 52 weeks, an entire year of masterclasses, which is amazing. And a big thank you to everyone who has been joining me since day number 1. Hey, Zeka. Hey, Agnes. Great to see all of you. All right. So I am over here on Dribbble on Slava Kornilov's page, and I came across this post not too long ago. And I thought it was super cool. I believe he created this in After Effects. That's, it allows him to have a little bit more flexibility over his animations and do some real 3D work. But I thought to myself, what if I tried to create something like this inside of Adobe XD using 3D transforms? So I gave myself a little bit of a challenge, which I absolutely love. So if you do follow me on Twitter or Dribbble or Instagram, you may have seen this post, which was inspired directly by Slava's post. And it's not exact, it'll never be exact, right? But it was a lot of fun using 3D transforms and auto animate and some of these additional effects. It's pretty interesting, right? All right, we've got, who else do we have in here? Guinea pig for user testing, that's true. Hopefully I'll have the transitions either removed or, worked out by next stream. All right, so we're gonna start the process of creating exactly this during probably this masterclass and the next one as well. We might not get to prototyping too much today, but we'll see. All right, so let's go ahead and hop over to Adobe XD and we're gonna just dive into things. So this is going to be primarily a mobile interaction. So we're going to start with the iPhone 12, 12 Pro, all that fun stuff, the Max, the biggest phone. Some people like starting with the smaller phones. Some people like starting with the bigger phones. Completely up to you and your developers. Definitely work with your developers. All right. So I'm going to name this artboard Fitness and let's get going. So on that particular design, there are a few things to note, but number one, it's relatively dark, right? So I do have my artboard selected and I'm gonna hop over here to the appearance section and change the fill to a nice dark color. I'm not gonna go pure black. I may change that later, especially if you're designing for OLED displays. Pure black is great, really saves battery life. But aesthetic-wise, since I'm not gonna be developing this for a phone, I am just gonna go a little bit up. A nice dark gray should work. All right, now to start laying out the screen, before we get to that fun stuff, we might want at the top maybe a profile photo and maybe a notification bell, just so that there's something up there, right? So I'm gonna grab my ellipse tool, shortcut key E, and drag out the profile photo. Now, as you're starting off your projects, there are a few things you might want to note. One, you may want to start adding some guides so that you can easily line things up. You can also use things like your square grid or your layout grid as well, if you really want to go down that route. But sometimes guides are fine. Let's go ahead and drag one out. Let's try about 24 pixels from the left. And you're noticing at the top left-hand corner, you can see some contextual information that lets you know 24 pixels, right? Same thing on the right, 24 right there. And you also have to keep a note. Let's take a quick look. That looks pretty good. You also have to keep in mind that if you're designing for many modern day phones, not just iPhones, Android devices as well, there's that lovely notch up there, right? So it's about, 45 pixels from the top, something around there. So you want to make sure don't put anything up in this area because it either won't be seen or accessible. So just drop it down a little bit just to give yourself a little bit of breathing room up there. All right, so we have our placeholder for our profile photo. Now what I can do is I can go ahead and hop over to Finder and maybe grab an image, let's say this one here, pop it on in there, double click and mask it if I need to. Or of course, if you have libraries, let's say your Toy Faces library, for example, I'm gonna go to my CC libraries right down here, document assets. And then if you have any photos or assets saved in your CC libraries, you can definitely access them from there and drag them on in. And what's cool about this is they come on in linked with, of course, you have the option of unlinking your graphic as well. But if you're working across several applications, Illustrator, Photoshop, whatever it might be, you can bring in linked files. That way, if you do go to Photoshop or Illustrator to edit those, they'll come on in and update, which is really cool. All right, I did see someone ask about, do you ever do the daily creative challenges? I did. I've done quite a few of the daily creative challenges. I haven't lately because we have some great hosts that are hosting the challenges. But also I've been incredibly busy with exciting updates that are coming. We have an update in May coming, an update in June. And of course we have a big update in October for Adobe Max. So stick around for that. All right, now over to the right, I might want a very small notification bell just to let users know that they might have a notification. So I could pop open something like Nucleo, a third-party icon manager, or I can use a plugin. Now I do have the Icons for Design plugin installed, and I can type out something like bell, and there we go. We have a nice little notification bell. I'll change the color. It is vector, so I can very easily... Someone's saying, have a great... Oh, Cody has bad crick in her neck. I'm sorry, Cody. Hope you feel better soon. All right, so I'm going to pop this on the right-hand side. Make it a little bit bigger. It's a bit small down there. And that's definitely the importance of popping open your preview from time to time just to take a quick look at how things are looking. All right, and then I might want to show what a notification may look like. So I'm going to drag out a very simple shape like that, pop it on top, and then possibly I can also add that border back, sample this color. There we go. Just gives a nice little effect, right? Okay. Let me make sure that everything is grouped. I can also turn this into a component if I want to, just so that if I do need to make changes to this specific element, I can easily do that. There we go. Okay. Now, we can start the process of building out the various cards that are going to be available as, workouts, for example, right? So if I go back to this example, we have all these cards that kind of go down this artboard and they're pushed back in 3D space, right? So we want to do something very similar to that. I'll let you watch it one more time just to kind of see how things are looking, right? And then there's a tap, and then that brings up additional items. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with that first card down here at the bottom. I'm going to grab the rectangle tool, shortcut key R, and drag one out just like this. Now, to give this shape a little bit of style, what I might want to do is just grab the handle on the inside and round out the corners. Let's try about 24 pixels. You can also do that directly in your properties inspector right over here. And in terms of the styling of this shape, I'm not too concerned about adding borders or shadows or anything like that, but I do want to add some images. So let's hop in here to Finder again. I'm going to drag this image. Whoops, I missed it. I'm going to drag this image in, and you can double click to make it large if you want to. There we go. Perfect. And then right over top, we may want to, we may want a little bit of text to let users know what exactly this card is. So I'm going to grab the text tool, shortcut key T, and type out something like yoga. You can make it nice and large, just like that. And then for the styling of this particular text, we may want to go a little bit stylistic. We could try a serif font, something like New Spirit. It's interesting, right? But for a workout app, I'm not sure it'll work. It is definitely interesting. I don't hate it, but let's try something like New Cobble. It's got a little bit of fun to it. It's sans serif. I think it'll do, right? Now, As you're designing cards that contain busy images in the background and text in the foreground, you may run into a scenario where you just can't get the colors right. So we have this white text and we have this woman in the back wearing a white shirt. Now, for the most part, you can see the word yoga, right? But if I were to change this to maybe yellow, it might clash with the background. If I were to change it to black, it might clash with her hair. So it's very tricky to get these colors right. So there's a few things you can do in this situation. One, you can try adding a bit of a shadow. Now, one thing you don't want to do is something like this, right? It just looks a little bit like a sore thumb. So it just kind of stands out. It's just not working. So when you're working with shadows, what you'll want to do is bump it down on the Y a little bit, not too much, especially if you're working with text that has these, thinner lines. Definitely blur it a lot. Let's try 16. And then just drop the opacity, just so it's nice and subtle, right? So if you take a look, the shadow is there, but it's also not there. So it's helping a little bit. And of course you can experiment and find the right opacity based on the images behind it, so on and so forth, right? That's one option. Another option is to use some sort of an overlay. So in this case, it might be a very simple black layer on top that or at the bottom, that will kind of just blend things in a little bit. So what we can do is duplicate this shape, and I'll just change the color to black. And again, we can put it on top or the bottom. Maybe I'll put it at the bottom, and then grab this image and just drop the opacity a little bit, right? And all of a sudden, if I undo and then redo, look how much that text now stands out. And the image is still there. We can still see the image, we can still see exactly what it is, but we have a nice amount of contrast now, which is great, right? All right, so with the first card, I'm gonna go ahead and select all these elements, group them, and call this card. All right, that looks pretty good. And now we are going to, and by the way, if anyone has questions here on Behance during the stream, definitely throw them in the chat. I am taking a peek from time to time. All right, we're gonna go ahead and duplicate this one up, and let's find a new image to throw in here. Let's see. That one looks pretty good. Pop that in place. And this could be aerobics, for example. I can probably also name the groups based on what they are, just so that I can very easily search if I need to. I don't think I spelled that correctly, did I? I did not. Aerobics. There we go. And this one is yoga. And then we'll duplicate another one up. Maybe we'll do one on cardio. And then the next one might be acrobatics. Let's find another image. I don't know if this is exactly acrobatics, but you know what? It might do. And then finally, one more. Running. Whoops. There we go. Okay, we'll pop that in there and change the group. Perfect. Okay, so we have our first set of cards. Now, if you remember the example that we're recreating, another set of cards actually comes into play after these ones are complete. Now, right now, everything's all over the place and everything's a mess. We're gonna get to 3D transforms very shortly, but I wanna make sure that we have yoga on top, and then aerobics, and then cardio, acrobatics, and running. Again, everything's kind of a mess, but if you're not concerned about 3D transforms, you can definitely leave it at something like this, which still looks pretty fun and cool, right? And of course you can add shadows and things like that, but we'll get to some of that fun stuff in a second. So I'm gonna group these elements and just call this first set. And now what we want to do is we want to duplicate this group and start working on the second set. We have a question in, I'm gonna duplicate this very quickly. Okay, question, is there a way to export an interactive preview the way you can click and hover, etc.? Yes, absolutely. So as you're building this out, I don't have multiple screens right now, but what you can do is go into share mode right here at the top. And then you'll be able to export and share for design review, development presentations, user testing, or you can create a custom preset. And when someone opens up a share link for design review, for example, they'll be able to interact with your prototype exactly like they can on the desktop. Even things like gamepad and key support comes on over. So hover, the whole 9 yards. Once we get to the prototyping stage, I'll definitely show you how that works, but absolutely. All right, so we have our first set, and we have our second set we have to work on now. Let's go ahead and drag some images in. And let's see, we have so many good images from Adobe Stock. I'll drag this one in here, and then that one in here. Perfect. Maybe one for basketball, and then finally maybe a strength one. I'll drag this guy in here. All right, so this one might be core. And then we'll do high intensity training. Oops. CrossFit. Anyone in the chat do CrossFit? I would probably fall on the floor if I tried that. And then I think Paul Tranny does that. He is in very good shape. And then finally, we'll do strength up here. All right, now one thing that's really good to note is as you're building out these various cards, I would definitely recommend saving some of your colors and character styles as assets. So if I hop down to my document assets here, we have our component that we created of our notification bell not too long ago, but we also can save our colors and character styles. So if I select any one of these text layers, which uses the exact same styling, I can press the plus button beside character styles, and that's going to add it directly to my document assets. And the massive benefit, especially in a scenario like this, where you have that particular text style being used across all these different cards, is that if you wanted to change that styling, you just have to right click, press edit, and then let's say I want to bump this up to extra bold or even black, right? That looks pretty good. Stands out a lot. You just have to change it once, which is wonderful. My CrossFit involves cookie curls from the jar to my mouth. That's basically me too, Brett. All right, so we now have our second set of cards and our first set of cards, right? Just like that. Things are looking good, getting there, right? Now, one thing you have to note is on the initial screen, these cards here, this second set, they're actually going to start towards the top and possibly even off of the screen. Now, as you noticed earlier when I moved this off to the right, if I were to move it off up to the top, it's going to jump onto the pasteboard. And that's because you deliberately dragged it off of your artboard. So naturally it's going to go onto your pasteboard. If you do not want that to happen, as we do in this case, what you'll want to do is actually group all the elements that you want to stay on the artboard. So I'm going to select the first set of cards and the second set of cards, pop them into a larger group and call this, let's say, cards. And now if I grab the second set and move it off, you're going to notice it did not jump onto the pasteboard, and that is because it's currently placed inside of a group that contains other objects that are on the pasteboard. So of course it's good to note, if I grab this entire set of cards and move all of it off onto the pasteboard, it's going to jump onto the pasteboard. So things to keep in mind, right? Okay, so we have our first set and we have our second set kind of hiding up at the top here. But what we want to do now is get a little bit more creative with this and actually add some, 3D perspective to some of these cards. So what we're going to do is we are going to start by moving this one maybe down a little bit. And at some point, probably after these 3D transforms, we're also going to add a navigation bar down here at the bottom. All right, so we're going to dive into the first set of cards and we're going to grab the aerobics card, or we can actually grab all of these except the first one. And then over within the properties inspector, you have this icon which activates 3D transforms. That will give you access to 3 new transformations, right? You can rotate on the X axis, the Y axis, and also you can push back in Z position, Z space, 3D space, whatever it might be. All right. Now you also have this gizmo in the center that you can do your transformations with. So you can rotate like that, or like this. And you can also push back. So I can just grab this handle here, this little circle in the middle, and just push these back in space a little bit. Just like that, right? Let me go ahead and deselect that one. I'm just gonna go through and just continue to push some of these back. Deselect that one, push these back. And then finally, I'm gonna do the same thing for this final running one. Just push it back just a little bit like that, right? So if I take a look, we have a little bit of depth now, right? Can I set a black theme for this app? If you're talking about Adobe XD, XD does not have a dark mode at the moment. Hopefully one day, but at the moment, it is definitely not a priority for the development team, since there are a lot of features that we want to get to over the course of the next, I don't know, who knows, long time. All right, so we've gone ahead and pushed these back in space a little bit, and of course you can still dive in here and make these a little bit longer if you want to. Maybe move the text a touch. It just gives the whole application a little bit more style. There we go. Perfect. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. Now, of course, optionally, you can add a little bit more depth. Just have some fun with 3D transforms, right? So I can dive in here and maybe grab these now and then maybe rotate them like this. Just along that y-axis. Right, you can also do that inside of the Properties Inspector right over there. All right, so we've got that looking pretty good. Now what we might want to do is do the same thing for our second set of cards. So in the meantime, I'm going to bring these on back in. I can also decrease the opacity so I can see both sets behind. And I'm going to push these back a little bit. And then we're going to push these ones back. And then finally, the final two at the top, push these back as well. And then this one. Perfect. And like I mentioned earlier, you can still dive in here and make a few changes. So I might want to grab, let's say, these ones here. -15. Perfect. Now they did pop behind because the Z depth of the second set was a little bit higher, or I guess lower, so it did pop behind a little bit, but I can just kind of shift these up until they do pop in. But it is all good, right? All right, I'm gonna make sure this is centered. There we go, and then perfect. Okay. I get very particular with these. I want to make sure that everything is looking as accurate as possible. All right, so there's our second set, and we have our first set. So now we can grab that second set one more time and shift it back up. There we go. Someone's asking, or saying, while working with stacks and components, if a component is to expand within a stack, so stacks at the moment are strictly a design tool. So if you were to create a stack inside, while you're designing, it will not extend to prototyping. What you have to do in that point is create a component and then use states to create, and you can also use stacks to help create those states, but it doesn't automatically extend to prototyping. That's quite a big challenge because there are many cases, I would say in most cases, you don't want a stack to automatically move things around when you're in prototype mode, right? So something the team wants to get to, but they're not there yet. All right, can XD work with paste appearance for 3D transforms? No, not at the moment. That would be nice. I definitely would like to see that as well, but at the moment, does not exist. All right, so we have these here. Now, maybe we want to just dive in here and maybe just increase the opacity just a little bit on this one. That one looks pretty good. Maybe we'll drop this a touch more, just so it adds a little bit more depth to our design. And then finally, we'll grab this one and pop it down as well. It's all right. It could work. It may not work. I'm not sure. We'll see. It's a little bit difficult to see, right? So let me undo some of these. We'll drop it a little bit. Let's say 55. Okay, I think that could work. All right, so we have some of our cards looking pretty good in, and they've been moved in 3D space, right? I can pull these up a little bit. And now, before we start getting into some additional screens, let's go ahead and create a navigation bar down here at the bottom. So I am going to grab the good old rectangle tool and draw one out across this artboard. And you have to keep in mind, very similar to the notch at the top of your displays, you also have a home indicator right down in this area here. Right about there. And that allows you to swipe to get back to your home screen. So what we want to do is just kind of move this up a little bit, or if you do decide to have this navigation bar all the way to the bottom, just make sure that no icons are down there so users won't be able to get to it. All right, why don't we have time trigger on component state? So time triggers was confirmed that it is coming later this year. Can't tell you exactly when, but it's in the works and it is coming. It's a very large project. It's a lot more deeper of a project than something like gamepad support for components, because time triggers, you know, if you all of a sudden you enable time triggers on components, things can be triggering all over the place. It could affect performance. Then you have to figure out, like, you know, what the conditions are. How do things trigger at certain times? Very large project, but was confirmed that it is in the works and later this year, as long as nothing explodes, right? Things explode sometimes. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and start styling this navigation bar. Let's round out the corners a little bit. Let's try, I don't know, 24. Might be a bit too much, but we'll see. Is there a way to unselect snap to pixel while in XD? So certain things will always snap, I believe, but yeah, I think that's just the way it is. So what you can do, so certain things will snap like this, but if you hold down your command key or your control key, it'll ignore that. So that might be one thing you can do. When will right to left support come to Adobe XD? That's another big question, big project. That's part of a much larger project. XD obviously needs a lot more text tools, but it needs a much better text engine to support all those text tools. So very large project. Right to left support is likely part of that project, but until that's all ready to go, I'm not sure exactly when, but I do know that definitely something that is either in the works or the team wants to get to. All right, so let's go ahead and add a little bit of a background blur, because everything needs a background blur, right? And let's bring this up so it's a nice subtle background blur. You don't want to go too crazy with these blurs. And maybe I'll add a little bit of a border on the inside. Just like that. Can you show your plugins? Scroll too quickly. Yes. So I do have a bunch of plugins installed. Some plugins I don't have installed, but here's a list of them. The ones I use the most are Icons for Design. I've been using the Presentation plugin a lot, which isn't available just yet, but probably very soon. Confetti's always fun. Fancy Maps, I love. Might be a bit biased because I designed it, but great app. Let's see, Google Sheets is always a good one, especially if you're working with data. Blobular, who doesn't like making blobs, right? A lot of cool plugins, definitely check them out and have some fun with those. All right, super looking forward to the text overhaul. Me too. Obviously, very large project, but yeah, whenever that is ready, it's gonna be quite exciting. All right, so let's go ahead and start getting in some icons. Let me actually open up Nucleo, which is a third-party icon manager. I do have some icon sets loaded in here, including Font Awesome. I'm gonna type out Home, and this one looks pretty good. Pop that in there. These are large icons, and still also vector-based, very similar to the Icons for Design plugin that I showed off earlier. So there's Home right there. And then we may want possibly a calendar icon. All right, make that quite a bit smaller. Perfect. And then possibly maybe like a challenges screen that might be lightning maybe. That could work. Shrink that on down. And maybe some sort of a share icon. Does that make sense? Probably not, right? What was the icon that I had on this project? Let's see. I'm going to cheat for a second. Which one was this? What icon was I using? Oh, like charts and things like that. I'm going to copy that from over here and paste it. There we go. All right. So we have some icons looking pretty good. And yeah, I lost my words. What we might also want to do is right in the center, have an icon so that you can add a workout or add some or add something, right? So I'm going to grab the ellipse tool, draw out a nice large circle, just like that. And then in the center of this, I might want, let's say, a plus button. So I can grab my pen line tool, make that a little bit larger, round out those caps, and then I can duplicate this one and then rotate it 90 degrees. Is presentation series on Behance, which you mentioned earlier this year. So possibly. I know this plugin has been in the works for a while. I'm not sure when I mentioned it, but I also did a live stream, a masterclass all about creating presentations. But this is that's a little separate from this. And that's a plugin. I've been using it. It's amazing, but you'll have to wait. I think it's coming soon. All right. Now, to give this particular button a little bit of style, what I'm going to do is maybe add a little bit of a border on the outside, drop the opacity a touch, and then maybe add a bit of a shadow. Again, very similar to what we were talking about earlier. With these shadows, you want to be very subtle. You can even add a little bit of color in there if it makes sense, right? Just a little shadow, blur it. And then possibly we can also do something like this. So we can subtract or grab that and then just sample this color. Now, there's a lot of accessibility issues here, right? So you want to be careful with that. Now, usually these floating action buttons kind of follow whatever color theme you're going with. So in this case, it could be yellow, possibly. That's an ugly yellow. That's like a mustard yellow. Don't use that yellow. It could be something like this. It could be red. It could be blue. Blue's a pretty actionable color. You could also use reds and pinks, but you got to be careful with that because sometimes reds and pinks indicate error states. So let's stick with this color here. And then for this button, let's go for, we can use this color. There we go. Perfect. Yeah, I don't know how I feel about this yellow, but I think it could work, right? Or we can go for a simple blue. And then for the add button, we can change this to white. I think that looks a bit better. It's a little bit more soothing. So I think we're going to stick with that. And I'll call this add. There we go. And then finally on this navigation bar, we may want to make sure that we know exactly which screen that we are on, right? So maybe right underneath, let's say we're on the home screen, we might just want to add a little bit of a circle. And there we go, little indicator. Now, because we added that circle there, it kind of threw everything off in terms of visual weight, right? If we hide this circle, now everything looks aligned. But if we add that circle back, all of a sudden things look a little bit off. So in this, whoops, I just closed XD. That was not fun. Or at least I closed my document. Open recent. Good thing I was working in the cloud, right? It auto-saved everything as I was going. All right, so going back to visual weight, right? If I were to bring that back, now everything's kind of thrown off. So in this case, what I might want to do is just make sure to move these up a little bit like that, right? And then for the non-active icons, we can experiment with some blend modes like hard light, right? It just blends it in just a little bit, especially with that background blur right there. Overlay and soft light might be a little bit too much, but hard light looks pretty good, right? It's just a little bit of that blending. And another thing that I would recommend in some situations, especially this situation here, right, is consider adding text to some of these icons. You know, if you take a look at this lightning icon or this blob of something, right? Most people would have no idea what this is. So if you just want to, let's say, I don't know, what would this be called? Progress. It's probably not a great word for this, but you know, just add a little bit of text down here. And I can also use the blend mode, hard light, for example. That one didn't work too well. Oh, because the color's off. Copy, paste, there we go, right? And then over here, this might be challenges. Calendar. And of course, now we have this little indicator. We have to, you know, another challenge to think about. So do we move this indicator down? Do we get rid of the indicator? Is there another way we can indicate, you know, using solid icons versus border-based icons? A lot of things to think about as you're designing apps like this, right? That looks a bit strange. So maybe we'll hide that for now. All right, I'm gonna go through and group these elements. And the reason I'm grouping it, obviously it'll help make my life a little bit, a little bit easier. Calendar. You can copy and paste colors. Yes, well, you can copy and paste appearances. And I was only concerned about the color, and that was the only appearance on there. So what you would do is just go to any layer that you want to copy the appearance from, just copy to your clipboard, and then go to the other layer and then paste appearance. You can also use the shortcut as well. Progress. All right, so I have everything grouped really nicely. So I'm gonna go ahead and select all these elements here, just like that. I'm gonna pop them into a larger group, call it navigation. And then what I can do is I can enable stacking. So if I needed to, I can always swap these elements around, just like that. A lot of interesting things you can do when you are working with stacks. And then you can adjust the spacing. There we go. It's not perfectly aligned, but that is okay. That'll do for now, right? All right, digging it, looking pretty good. All right, what typeface are you using for the project? So at the moment, I am using, there it is, New Cabal. I believe it's New Cabal, something like that. It's made by a German typographer, and it's just a great looking typeface. It has some fun stylistic properties to it. It's just fun and exciting. All right. So what we're going to do now is we are going to start the process of, I'm going to show you what it would look like when 3D Transforms is actually in action. Then we're going to move on to some additional screens and get to more of that next week. So what we want to do is we have this first screen here. And by the way, I should probably grab this entire navigation bar and pop it into a component. That way I can very easily make changes across all of my screens a little bit later on. And I'm going to make sure to name this navigation. All right, perfect. So we have our first screen looking pretty good. And now what we want to simulate is when these cards are swiped down or clicked down, if there's navigation of that sort, is we want those second set of cards to kind of come flying in. So we're going to duplicate this artboard over to the right. And here we want to start by grabbing that second set of cards and dragging them on in. Very similar to the first set, right? And then the first set, we're going to move down. And we can dive in here and just kind of make this look a little bit more like that first set. It was pretty close, but there were a few things that we needed to change. But it looks pretty good. So that's just the basic of it, right? We're going to get a little bit fancy in a second. But if we were to go to prototype mode right here at the top, and then let's say we might want just the entire artboard, or maybe this set of cards, let's say, to be dragged down or clicked or whatever it might be. We can drag the handle to the second artboard. And then inside of the properties inspector, let's start with a drag transition, a trigger. We'll see what that looks like. And if I press play, we can now drag down and the new cards kind of come flying in. It's a little bit boring though, right? Let's also add a tap trigger. I'm gonna press the plus button, tap, good. Destination is that artboard there. And let's say ease in and out Let's try 1 second, see what that looks like. That looks okay, right? But incredibly boring. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna make some changes so that as the cards are leaving the artboard and as the cards are coming into the artboard, it looks a little bit more exciting. So first change we're gonna make is we're gonna grab the first set of cards in here and we can pull them on out, right? Just like that. Grab this one over here. Perfect, right? So now if we do the same thing, there's a little bit of motion in there. Very subtle, right? But there's motion. And of course you can continue grabbing this entire set and just like that. Maybe you want to dive in here and you can also use 3D transforms, Command and Control T, and rotate them a touch, right? But of course, the second set is probably where you're going to see most of that motion. So inside of the first artboard, if you grab the second set, let's go ahead and drag these out. And then maybe we can actually swing them on back, right? Again, very subtle motion, but adding that spacing and some of the rotational differences just makes it look a little bit more interesting. Let's do it one more time. And you can definitely see it as we're dragging, right? You're noticing the cards at the bottom, they're separating a lot faster, right? And then the cards at the top, they're kind of coming in like that. And maybe this one here, I might want to reset so that it doesn't come in on an angle. Because it looked a little bit strange, and that one kind of slides down, and the rest of the cards nicely settle into place. Right? All right. So that's looking pretty good. Now what we want to do, let me just check for questions. Oops. Close that. All right. So what we want to do now is, before we get too crazy with some of the tweaks, is we might want to start exploring what the next screen might look like. Once someone gets onto this set of cards, they might want to click on CrossFit, and it's going to expand, and additional information might come into play. So I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this artboard over. Let's name this CrossFit. Could you up the time to 6 seconds so we can see the transform easier? So I can up the time to 5 seconds. That is the maximum at the moment. So 5 seconds, and here we go. Right? Interesting. And I think one thing I also did in my example is I started these cards off a little bit reduced opacity so that they also faded in. And I think I also pushed them back as well. So if I push this one back a lot, and inside the properties inspector, you see it's like negative 654. I'm gonna push this one back even more. Sometimes effects like this will work, sometimes they simply won't. So definitely experiment and have some fun with this. Let's make sure they're all lined up nicely. And then we can reduce, so this one might be maybe 80%, and then 60, 40, 20, and then maybe 0. So one more time, right? Again, very subtle effects, but going back to what someone was asking about bumping up the time, if we were to bump this up to 5 seconds, right, we can kind of see some of the cards coming on in from the back, and also the opacity is changing a little bit. Let's go back to 1 second, and right, we can drag or we can tap. Phew. Pretty good. All right, so going back here, what we want to do now is, again, when a user taps on the CrossFit card, we want it to expand, but we also might want the additional cards to fly out, or at least, get modified in some way. So these ones at the back, we might want to push back a little bit. Something like that. And then possibly even rotate a touch, and then maybe they'll fly out this way, right? Something like that. And then these ones down here, we might want something very similar. So I'm gonna select this one and this one, maybe rotate, push on down. There we go. And then of course the CrossFit one, we want we want to almost reset the transformations, right? So you can right click and then reset the transformations just like that. We're gonna move this up to the top. Maybe we'll make it a little bit longer. We might not need the rounded corners, so I'm gonna dive in here to both of these layers and just set the rounded corners at 0. Let's go ahead and grab this layer here. Oops. Move it on down. There we go. Now I'm noticing I'm using the exact same avatar for, as the background image. Might be something I might want to change in the future, or possibly we might not even need the avatar or notification bell on this particular screen. Can you give an audio effect for the transition? So I can. I don't have any audio effects at my disposal right now, but when you are in prototype mode for tap triggers, you can definitely add an action at the bottom so that there's like a view or some sort of a something, right? Actually, what I can do, possibly, let's try this. Speech playback. Oh no, I can't record one from XD. Of course I can't. Can I? No, I cannot. Okay, never mind. But if I can record my own voice, something like that, right? All right. So we made some changes here, and you may also want to hide the navigation bar, for example, replace the avatar at the top, possibly with, let's add a little caret, or carrot, or however you pronounce it. Just like that. And then maybe this avatar just kind of floats off to the side. The caret will just kind of fade into play. Why is the responsiveness uneven? Which responsiveness? I want to fix it if it's uneven. All right. And then what we want to do here is select the card that we want to tap on. So in this case, it's the CrossFit card. We're going to pull this handle over to the right. And similar to the last interaction, we can add a tap trigger. Probably want it a little bit faster than the previous interaction. And then we can also add another trigger, and it could be drag, right? I always had a doubt regarding auto animate. Can we control that? I'm not sure what you mean by that. Let me know what exactly you're trying to do with auto animate, and I'll see if I can answer that question. All right. Phew, look at that. Isn't that fancy? And of course, like the last interaction, we can just drag this up, and you can see all the cards kind of floating off into the distance. And you may even want to dive in here. Maybe just drop the opacity. Maybe I'll just pop them at 0. So again, view, right? They kind of just fade away. It's a fun little effect. All right, so also on this screen, we may want some additional information. Now we also might want maybe a little bit of a fade out down here. And this is where another overlay could come into play. Or you can pop it on top of all of this, or you can add it to the original card. May not be necessary right now, but you could do something like this, right? And linear gradient, both of these dark colors. Fade this one out. Make sure it's behind the text. Oops. There we go. It looks okay. We have to make sure that the color matches, of course. There we go. And then one more time. So we have a little bit of a fade down there, right? Interesting. It could work. All right, so down here, we may want some additional cards, maybe for some live sessions that might be happening or future sessions that is part of the CrossFit category. So I'm gonna grab the rectangle one more time, draw one out. We're gonna round out the corners, but probably not 24 pixels. 24 might be too much for a rectangle of this size, so let's try 16. It's a little bit more subtle. If we have we lost the option to change the radius of individual corners by holding Alt in recent updates? No, I don't believe so. Nope, still works. As long as it's a rectangle, you should be able to do it. Just make sure to hold down Alt or Option and should still work. All right, so on here, we might want possibly a new image. Drag that one in, and then some information about this particular event. So this could be Monday motivation. I might want to left align it. try white for the text. Now we're running into some similar issues that we talked about earlier about working with text and, you know, interesting colored backgrounds. It's hard to see this text, right? So you could do things like, if it's always going to be on top of that blue, you can maybe sample the blue and then darken this a little bit, which looks interesting. You can also add an overlay. A lot of interesting things you can do with things like text, right? Let me actually just very quickly, I'm going to duplicate this, paste this appearance from this other document. Oops, I missed it. There we go. Right, so you add a little bit of an overlay. Basically what it is just a gradient with hard light as the blend mode. And it just adds a little bit of contrast back there, so you can use something like a simple white text. Let's add an avatar, and then maybe we'll have the instructor's name, drop that down a touch. Let's find another image. Maybe this guy. This guy looks like he would be teaching CrossFit, right? Maybe I'll add a little bit of a border on this particular shape just so that it doesn't get lost in that background. All right. And then finally at the top, we may want a section that kind of kicks things off and lets you know that this is either a live session or pre-recorded or whatever it might be, right? So on this side, I'll just say live. Let's use this lovely red. And then maybe we'll round out the corners just a little bit, somewhere around 8. This one in the background, let's go ahead and add another background blur, because why not, right? It could do. All right, and then over here, starting now, tap to join. Let's change this color to white so we can see it. And then maybe expand this a touch. All right. I'm gonna give a little bit more padding on the right-hand side. Select all this information and then also these layers, and I'm gonna call this card. All right, we have a few minutes left. I would definitely make some tweaks to this particular card, but what I want to do is show you how, yeah, I'm not loving this card. Maybe the rounded corners are a little bit too rounded. I'm gonna pull this in a touch. Maybe I'll alter this text. Medium. I'm still not loving it. I'll make changes to it later, but what I do want to show you is how you can also bring these cards into view as well. Let's add one more down here. And I'm going to grab one more image. This one looks great. Actually, that's going to replace it as the overlay. So I'm going to copy that, paste it. We don't need an overlay in that case. I might want to flip this. There we go. I would definitely make changes to this particular background blur. That's a little bit better. So we have these two cards here, right? And we want these cards to also fly into view. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to place them right about here, which is where I want them. And we're going to have some additional information up at the top. But we also want these cards to be present on the first artboard as well. So what we can do is actually select both of these cards and place them into the cards group. That way they're not lost on the pasteboard. When we do go into here, we can move them down. We can possibly even move this one back a little bit using 3D transforms. Right? And then, those cards come on up, right? There's a little bit of a lag there. But there we go. All right, curious if you ever run into developers getting upset about design features like a little gradient to make text pop for complexity. Yeah, I mean, developers definitely get angry about small things like that. Sometimes they're not small things, sometimes they're unnecessary, to be honest. But things like gradients for an overlay, not very difficult to implement as a developer, but definitely talk to your developers to see what kind of things that they need or what requirements they have, what things they don't like, for example, all very important in the development and design world. But I do want to thank everyone who has joined me today. I will be back next week with the continuation of this particular project, and then definitely let me know on Twitter what kind of projects you want to see in the future. So a big thank you to everyone who has tuned in, and stick around. Kyle T. Webster's coming up with an illustration masterclass, and I will see you all next time.